Jonny Pain. Thank you for joining me today.
Very honoured to be here, mate. It's exciting to get down and visit you in your home turf.
Early flight down from Edinburgh?
Yeah. We were up at stupid o'clock, Scott and I, who's lingering in the background. But good. Enjoyable anticipation knowing we're coming to see you, mate.
Good. That means a lot.
When's the last time we saw each other?
I think it was
in person?
It was on that trip to Ben Nevis, I think.
Yeah, which is over a year.
I've dropped the ball a little bit. When I was in Edinburgh the other week or the other month, I did think about hitting you up. I bumped into...
Then you remember what it was like and thought, no.
You know what it's like when you're in a city for like 48 hours? It's just non-stop.
I gave you a bit of needle about it. I know what it's like.
So listen, mate, you were a guest that when we sort of started conceptualizing the podcast, I had my hit list of guests that I wanted to get on, and you were in that list. Someone who I've got a huge amount of respect for.
Thank you.
And I just think the storytelling around yourself as an athlete, as a coach, and also I think a hot topic for us today would be around hybrid training as someone who's been very much in that space for a long time, and obviously worked with. We're going to talk about Alex Viada as well. Worked with him in the early days, and I think being in that space for as long as it's been something, and over the last sort of 12 months it started to be popularized a little bit more and sometimes bastardized. So I wanted to dive into that for some of the listeners. But before we get into it, I ask everyone, what does without limits mean to them? So without too much thought, when you think about without limits, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think my answer off the cuff would probably be a bit woolly and deep in actual fact, so apologies for that. I think stretching your limits and without limits to me means you first got to find out where you think they are, and so to push them and to kind of remove them is an exercise of going in a little bit. So a little bit of spiritual weightlifting. You've got to kind of find out where those points I talk about fear quite a lot, where the fear is, and kind of lean into that, try and find out where that fear is, and then explore that a little bit. And push it, because I think the limits are probably where your fear is. So without knowing what those fears are, and it could be anything. This could be the reason I'm jumping around a little bit, because it doesn't immediately speak to training for me. I know it's something that brings us back to training in terms of your business as a what would you call that? A logo? That's not a logo. What would you call that?
Bit of a slogan.
Slogan. That's what I was looking for. A maxim. But yeah, I think your limits are at the edges of your fear. And most people are afraid to kind of find out where that is. And if they do find out where that is, most people will then kind of stay shy of that. And so I'm of the opinion that unless you're tackling your fear, which I know is something you're doing at the moment, if you're tackling new things, new challenges, and things you think are maybe bigger than your capability, that's where your limits are. And you've got to push past that to be without those limits.
So I was thinking about you this morning, right, and then thinking about this element of like stoicism that you've got on a deeper level of thinking, and I was hoping that would sort of come out in today.
And we're 30 seconds in,
and but I think that's what draws me to you as an individual and a character, and what's quite endearing is because there's layers to it, and a lot of people in fitness are using fitness as a way to show a level of bravado or athleticism or capability, but it's very superficial. Whereas with you, I think there's years of deliberate practice, but also like reps and sets that aren't necessarily there on the surface that meets the eye, but you can call upon them when you need to. Now, for a lot of people, they will know who you are. Obviously, Omnia Performances being your business with Fergus, so a lot of people will know who Jonny Pain is. It's a bit of a wanky question to ask you to tell us who Jonny Pain is, but for those people that don't, because I know that your personal brand is something that you're working more on over the last 12 months, but for a period of time, you probably are happy operating in the shadows.
For a long time, mate. Yeah, it never. It was never something. You and I talked about it. It was probably those were the first kind of key sparks. It was like you were kind of encouraging me to get in front of things a little bit and speak my mind. But it's never been something that interested me all that much. So if people do know who I am, they've probably searched a little bit and found become very disappointed very quickly.
And for those that don't, I mean, but that's also in this day and age with fitness, why I think there's a bit of mystery around you, which is something I think you need to be, you need to hold on to some degree, because it adds to the story and the personal brand, and people want to be a little bit more inquisitive. But also, for me being nosy, and for listeners that have been nosy, who is Jonny Pain?
So, to your point, I've been working. I'll kind of frame it within fitness for that to be easy, because I'm sure we'll dig into other things. We know there's 1,000 stories there, not all of them good. In the fitness industry, I've been working, every time I say this, I think, oh, I'm 4 years out now, because I've had these conversations. I've said I'm 15 years in the industry, and that was 5 years ago. So 20 plus years. And Omnia has been operating for about 3 and a bit now. Before Omnia, which is certainly sort of the evolution of Painless Performance, which was just my kind of trading name, I didn't have a website, I didn't have anything. So I operated maybe for 20 years as a strength and conditioning coach without anything other than word of mouth, which served me well in actual fact. The background for me started out with combat sports. We'll probably come to why that was a thing at all, but combat sports for sure. So boxing, MMA, or no holds barred, cage fighting wasn't even a thing back then, just brawling.
Bare knuckle fighting.
Bare knuckle, yeah. It was unlicensed circuit for me to start with, and I was working with guys and a few girls even back then in that kind of strength and conditioning position, and a lot of nutrition work. And slowly built up kind of a roster of athletes who were kind of coming to me for a little bit of advice to start with, and then I realised this is something I really liked doing. At the time, I was in a corporate role actually, so I was kind of flip-flopping between these few hats that I was wearing. Some of them hats that I shouldn't have been wearing, and I've kind of slowly kind of leaned into that and realised how much I love it. And as we said earlier on, a lot of it becomes kind of spiritual is the wrong word, but philosophical almost for me. It kind of gives me a chance to kind of think about things, think about who I am, and it becomes a conduit for other things. So I'm jumping about a bit, but 20 years I've been doing that, and it's had its ups and downs, but I've had the opportunity to work with people right up to, I think, you know, I work with Tyson Fury and Billy Joe Saunders and some big names in the UFC. So all of this was under the radar, kind of in the background, and again, you've said we'll touch on the relationship with Alex and the kind of inception of what we now call hybrid athletics, or hybrid whatever people are calling it, and developed a bit of a niche for being keen to make sure that people were kind of touching on every facet of quote unquote fitness, and so became the guy that people in the industry, certainly in combat sports, would kind of lean on for advice and for strength and conditioning, for things that, you know, when there was big preparations going on. And then we've kind of, for want of a better word, kind of commercialized that over the past few years. And you know, even people like yourself saying people want to know this kind of stuff. So it's a case of, okay, well, let's put it front and center and talk about exactly what that is. So that's a kind of a line through the middle, I think, if I haven't missed things up. But then there's been a sort of military involvement. There's been some criminal elements that we can maybe talk about a little bit, and some leans either side of that line, and a few daft stories in between. So it's been a decent journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent journey, and you're a very interesting character. I mean, to look at you visually, you know, fucking skulls everywhere all over you, tattoos all over your body, and you know, you've had a decorated history with combat sports as a coach, but also you're fairly handy in a fist fight.
Yeah. So should you just say yeah to that? I don't know if I am anymore. Nobody's challenged me for a while. Please don't.
But like I said, there's also a level of depth to that. You know, you're very studious, articulate, and you know the subject matter when it comes to training, and you're also a very dedicated and passionate coach. So to have that level of, and I experienced it when we went up the mountains. Right, we for those that don't know, whatever it was, over a year ago, myself, Jens, Charlie, came up and spent a couple of days with yourself and Fergus. We did Ben Nevis as a bit of a warm up on one day, and then we did the Ring of Stahl. You say that way better than I do.
Well done, mate. Yeah. It's not the Ring of Steel; it's the Ring of Stahl.
On the second day, and it was a tough couple of days.
Yeah.
But what you were very good at is giving us encouragement and the motivation, but also just that level of like care. If there was sort of a period of climbing or whatever where it was a little bit uncertain, you were very compassionate in making sure we got there, but also the encouragement we needed to do it. So, like I said, there's layers of depth here, which I think you've accrued over many years, and the stories that you've kind of experienced, or the life lessons that you've kind of experienced. So
quite old now.
Your time in, let's go back to your time pre fitness coaching. So I think there was some army stuff there was some military stuff in there, and corporate world. So from school, what kind of got you to?
So from school, the journey journey became a strange one. So from school, I'm from a very, very small town in the north of Scotland, the most northern town in Scotland, and there's only about 10,000 people. I think there's about a quarter of that there now, in fact. It's an old fishing and farming community. But then there's Dounreay was the nuclear site next to that. You may have heard of Dounreay. And there's also an MOD site, which you won't see on the maps that is there, which is where my dad worked. So we were there, and there's nothing there. So everybody left as soon as they could to go somewhere where there was something. And you know, growing up, I had skateboarding, and that was it. You know, and I got expelled from school, 14, 15 years old, for stookieing. Anybody know what a stookie is? Sticking the head on the music teacher.
Headbutting, is that what it is?
He had that coming. And you know,
what's it called, a stookie?
A stookie. So I got thrown out of school, but I was doing well at school, but it was just that I wasn't one for backing down when he was out of order. So that was that. So I moved.
Hold on, what did the music teacher do to deserve a headbutt?
He hid work of mine. So I was very good at music. Music's huge for me, and I had worked hard. I'd been bumped past so this is my age, and I'd been bumped past O grade into higher. They said you're too good for O grade. You can do higher. So this is me getting my moment in the sun. They didn't like it, and there was a piece of music that we had to create. So I've got. I mean, you probably don't know this. I've got a grade 5 piano capability, and I can teach and all that kind of stuff. But I can't read a stitch of music. So to get those grades, I had to kind of get perfect in everything and then fail that one part every time, which is odd. But I managed it. And one of the things at school was we had to write a piece of music. I can't even read music. It just makes no sense to me at all. It's like hieroglyphics. So it took months and months for me to do this thing, and a lot of effort and a lot of crying and hard work. And when I handed it in to the guy, he took it from me. Thanks very much. Took it, and then I failed the exam, and I couldn't understand why. And he said, "Well, you never handed in. It's called your invention. You never handed in your invention. I handed it straight to you." And he said, "Well, you can't prove that, can you?" He didn't like me. Just didn't like me. I think because I was better at what he was trying to teach. So he got my head on his nose.
Fair.
That was that.
I think he deserved the sticky.
He did. So it was like, right, get out. So that was that. So it was 14 and 15, something like that. And I left home and went to Glasgow. And that's quite young to be in Glasgow. And I'd got like everybody else had, I got a young person's rail card, so therefore I could get into the pub because I was officially 18. So I spent all my time in Glasgow drinking and fighting and just kind of being a young man in the city that didn't really know what to do. Found my feet a little bit, and I was actually going to be in a band in Bristol. A band that made it quite big, actually. I was going to be in Bristol so I'm painting a picture here of my personality because Charlie, who I was going to move down to Bristol to be with in the band, he had a place set up for me, and I remember calling him from a phone box to say I'm on my way, and the conversation, I don't know what the argument was about. The conversation went badly, and I was told not to come anywhere near Bristol. So me and the girlfriend had everything packed up in the back of a transit van, and we drove to where her mum was, which was in Nottingham, as a kind of a circuit break to kind of calm down, and then I'll get back onto Charlie, and we'll get to Bristol. And that conversation just wouldn't happen. So we're friends now, Charlie and I, but that was that pulled me away from Bristol. So Nottingham was a mistake, or it was a stopgap. And I ended up there for 12, 13 years. And I guess that's where my formative years were, really, because the rest of it, I was still just a boy, you know. So I went to Nottingham, went into the local pub in the little place that I was staying. And I think within 15 minutes, somebody wanted to fight me because of my accent. This was a hard pub. It was a little mining community I was staying in. And the legend that I'll never forget was, I said, you got a pint of heavy. We'd have called it a pint of heavy down in England. They didn't call it heavy. It was like a bitter or a best or something. And so there was confusion. I remember saying to the barman, "It's a pint of heavy I want." And he was going, what the fuck's heavy? Just a pint of heavy. At this point, I thought he was taking the piss out of me. So somebody said, "Oh, Scottish are you? Think you're hard, don't you?" You know. So their interpretation of the fact that I had a Scottish accent was like it was a flex. So within 10 minutes of that, we were outside in the car park having a fight, which I won. And then over the course of the fight, I'd only been there about 3-4 weeks, maybe I had about 10 square goals. Because every time I fought somebody, they brought somebody else in to have another go. And that's how I got into a kind of bare knuckle fighting, because eventually there was the offer of kind of to do that for a bit of money, and it was in the backs of pubs and all the rest of it. So it was unlicensed, and it's not Snatch, although it was a bit like Snatch.
That's what I picture when I think about it.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt.
I remember a good friend of mine, meeting him. We went to I've been drinking with this guy. This is a little side story. I've been drinking with a real good friend of mine, Jimmy. I was talking to Scott about Jimmy the other day. Hardest man I've ever known. Been drinking with him, just another Scotsman. So we'd bonded, and we'd been drinking for weeks. And I went just to watch some fights in a gypsy camp. And out of the bales of hay came this big gypsy, and then out of the bales of hay came this guy Jimmy that I'd been drinking with for weeks, and he stiffened this man. That was like Snatch. So Jimmy became my best friend, and we kicked about fighting people for quite some time
in Nottingham.
And then we got Jimmy far better, far more experienced at that than me, and also.
Well, so this is a bit of a young. Like,
I'm jumping about a bit.
What,
anyway.
no, it's good.
Slow me down, Ollie.
What makes a good fighter? Like in that sense.
I wasn't officially a good fighter. I was just.
So is it technical ability mixed with just being a hard bastard?
In that environment, yeah. So what happened to me was people got better. So I was game. I was ready to have a go and just wouldn't give up, and was kind of, for want of a better word, just violent, just able to kind of see red and go for it, you know. And even if I was getting clattered and knocked down, I was getting straight back up, which frightened people. Oh, I thought I'd done him, you know. It was, that kind of refusal is enough to frighten the hell out of people.
Stay the fuck down.
Christ, he's got up 3 times, right, I give up. That kind of thing. Whereas somebody like Jimmy would come in, and he'd spent 15, 20 years studying martial arts very, very closely, and he was beating guys with just a sidestep and a heavy punch, you know. So what would take him 3 seconds would take me, 45 minutes. And then guys were, then this kind of idea of no holds barred, and it wasn't just standing up and seeing who could fist fight. It was, if it hit the ground, you keep going kind of thing, became a thing. I had no skills on the ground, so there was no weight classes, so I'm fighting somehow 55 kilo guy who's climbing up me like, you do jiu-jitsu now, you know what that feels like, where you look at a guy and you still, even though you think, I'm 3 times this size, this will be okay, and then he does some actual jiu-jitsu and you're like, oh shit, now I know. So you got this little snakes climbing up your corner. So that was the kind of point where I realised, and there's a split point here where I realised actually I was stronger and fitter than most people that I came up against, a lot stronger, because I was training, and I liked training, and I read a lot about training, and I dug into the science, and really fixated on making sure my training was useful. So then people were coming to me because they might have recognised that they had more skill, but somehow they would just hold them still or whatever, and that was unusual, because I was only small, 65 kilos I think I fought at, and that was happening, but then we were also involved in a certain, you'd expect from these stories, a certain amount of criminality, which we don't have to go too much into, which meant that a lot of my kind of day-to-day life was kind of a little bit of paranoia. There might be somebody ready to do me if I went into this pub that could all kick off all this kind of, it was that kind of life I was living. And I think I took a heavy kicking one time. 8 guys jumped me and they were stamping on my head and all kinds of things. And I came away from it thinking that I'd been getting away with it all this time. I was like, I don't have any skills here. What I've got is a bit of a rage personality, which is only going to get me, clearly is only getting me so far. And I went to see a guy called Jeff Thompson, actually a guy called Tony Summers, who was Jeff's kind of right-hand man, to learn proper skills, to learn what we call self-protection. So they did something called the reality-based combat system, which was very, very real, as opposed to kind of, karate katas or something like that. And again, yourself from jiu-jitsu, when you're fighting jiu-jitsu, it's real. If you get caught, that if somebody wanted to not let you go when you tapped, they could kill you or maim you, couldn't they? So ground fighting and jiu-jitsu was part of that, but we would practice to properly fight. So you would get 2 guys back to back and just go for it. And then Jeff and Tony would then kind of debrief and show you skills and all this kind of stuff. So I spent a lot of time learning to fight. But the reason I was doing it comes back to your without limits question, is because I was scared. I suddenly, after this kicking, I became kind of super hyper aware that I could lose fights. Oh shit, I'm not invincible. And then realized that all the other things that were leading me to these fights weren't going to go away, so I needed to develop some skills. And actually, despite the story I'm telling you, I was really quite scared of confrontation as well. The setting up and saying, right, Ollie, you and me are going to go, there's a pattern to that. Even what we used to call on the cobbles down there, kind of a square go on the street, there were rules. Whereas if somebody really just wants to do you, they're not going to say, okay, so are you ready? Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen, you know. So I became kind of really aware of my environment and how best to kind of manage that kind of stuff. So dug very, very deeply into the kind of, I suppose, what you would call it, the more the more mindset-based martial arts, you know, in the sense that I was trying to dig deeper into how I was thinking as opposed to how I was moving. That makes sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. So at the time, was it about, because you were earning a bit of money doing this, right? Was it about money? Was it about a young lad just trying to find his way, or was it about a real passion for fighting and?
A bit of all of that, really, right. But mostly I think it was about ego. I think you know, I could have said no to any one of those fights and didn't do, because I felt like that would be some. So that was a lesson I needed to learn, was that, you know, I can walk away, and that was the interest. Here's a little story. Tony, I remember saying to me, this has stuck with me forever, and I think about it in a few different ways now. But Tony, who was coaching me at the time, said, "Tell me why you want to learn these particular skills, because we're teaching people how to be very, very dangerous very quickly." And I said, well, for instance, Tony, I go to this pub. I can't even remember the name of the pub now. Let's call it the Horse and Crown. So I was going to this pub, which is local to me, 10 minutes away, not even walk. And I would go in there and have my pint. And I knew that 9 times out of 10 I was going to be in a fight, or at least threatened. You know, and I would sit in that pub. And I said, I want to make sure that when I'm in that pub, that when these fights come on top, I'm gonna come out on top of that. If something kicks off, I'm gonna win that fight. And I don't want to go in there afraid that I'll lose. So I want to be able to sit, drink my pint, and get to the point where nobody fucks with me. I can just drink my pint. And he said, have you ever thought about not going to that pub? Which is so obvious, isn't it? So bloody obvious. And I hadn't. I genuinely hadn't. And I remember being baffled by that. Like, No, I need to be able to go to the pub and have my pint. And he didn't answer. He just looked at me for long enough until he heard the penny slowly dropping down the thing, you know. And eventually I felt the ego slip away a little bit, and I realized, shit, I'm the problem. You know, there isn't violence all around me at all. I don't live in a violent world at all. I'm manifesting that violence. I'm creating that violence. So I am the violence. I'm going in there, and this guy over here who's giving me a dirty look and I think he's challenging me. That's because I'm looking at him, So all of a sudden it was like a little scene in a movie where the whole thing went and flipped round, and I saw the lens changed, and I saw the reality of it. And it was a big, big wake-up call. I remember being, it felt like an awakening, and it felt very scary, because I was like, oh, the world is the other way around. I'm the wrong side of this looking glass.
How old were you at that stage?
28? No. It's about 25, 26 perhaps.
I've talked before about sort of, and I've had guests on where it's all about this kind of like stage of their life, and identity sort of shifts and changes. It sounds like that was probably a time where your identity has gone from this sort of hard bloke from Scotland in Nottingham fighting everyone to now realising that might not be who.
Well, I had to maintain that for quite some time after, because we were still...
Because of the circles you're in.
That's right, yeah. But I managed to find ways of looking at it very differently. And also some of it, from a very practical sense, became very different. I didn't have to go in and expect a fight. I could go in and maneuver people just by owning the room in a certain way and positioning people so that they felt like, oh, I don't think I want to fight. You can position people, we call it framing sometimes. You can move people around a little bit so that they realise they're threatened but don't really realise they're threatened.
Physically move them around?
Yeah. So there's I'm trying to find a way to describe this without it being visual, but I was just learning how to kind of manage my space a little bit better, rather than trying to look scary or be big, or, you know, I was never big anyway, but, you know, look aggressive. it was different ways. So the actual fighting, the art of fighting without fighting, as Bruce Lee called it, was like sometimes you don't need to fight. You just need to help the other person understand that they don't want it. And that became interesting to me because it allowed me to control even things like controlling my breathing and understanding the environment rather than going in there fully on fire and just, I'm going to smash everything. It would just like, well, I can manage it very differently, which then spoke to everything else, essentially, how I managed people and how I managed conversations. And yeah, it was a big shift. It didn't change my environment a huge amount. It changed how I interacted with my environment.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned that training was a big part of everything you were doing then. Why did training become so important to you? You also referenced you were 65 kilos, which isn't particularly big. So was training about, what was your motivation to want to be stronger or be bigger? Was it because of the fighting? Was it childhood experiences, sport?
No, very much because of the fighting. It was very much an incidental need at the time. So I had, so around about that same time as I've just described, I was still getting away with it, 100% getting away with it. And I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I came away not dead from about 100 situations is beyond me. Very lucky.
It just shows how far willpower can get you, though, right?
Oh, it really does.
The ability not to quit.
Because I can look exactly that. Yeah, I can look back on those experiences and think, okay, what I thought was really happening wasn't. It was more about that kind of inner resolve and that refusal and all that kind of thing. I wasn't a hard man at all. I was just difficult to break my spirit. So round about that exact same time, I became very aware that I was, and I guess this is an age thing as well. If you look at army conscription and things, you're looking at, I think the average age used to be, there was a Paul Hardcastle song called 19. That was the average age they wanted soldiers in because they didn't understand death. They were just, their ego and their understanding of themselves was that they were invincible, so they're the better soldiers. And there's a point at which you age to a point where you suddenly realize your own mortality is really, I could die here, and then you're less useful as a soldier. And
that's such a real thing, isn't it?
Like, it really is. Yeah.
I remember back to just even now when I walk down the streets of Harpenden, which isn't a scary place at all, but you get kids like try and drop the shoulder on you or just give you a bit of lip, and I'm thinking, fucking. But I was just like that as well. You literally think you're invincible.
Yeah, that's it. And then there's this kind of moment. Mine was a very real moment because I got a heavy doing. Where I realized I wasn't invincible. And then in that, all this kind of fragile, I was going to say lie, it wasn't a lie, but this idea that I'd built up in my own head about who I was just shattered. It was like a sugar pedestal, and then the rain came and oh, fuck, I no longer stand on the pedestal. I'm just standing in a syrupy goo. So that realization then made me realize I wasn't able to change my environment very quickly. I couldn't just up and leave. There were responsibilities I had as much as commitments and loyalties I'd made to those people as well. You don't just fuck off on your friends. So I was suddenly hugely aware that there was a big sort of chasm underneath me that I could step into at any point. So training very specifically in self-protection, cross-training in the martial arts, and trying to extract what was genuinely useful, which is not a lot, frankly. You can do all these different martial arts, but what works really in a real violent confrontation are a very small packet of things.
What being would you say is the best martial art for that?
If you want to know how to fight, I would say learn how to box. Go boxing and or some kind of ground game. Wrestling or jiu-jitsu are great. Muay Thai is great, but boxing's very honest. If you're training boxing, you're learning to punch and be punched in the face. You can't hide from it. It's very real. You don't play boxing, do you? Mm-hmm. So I think any kind of art like that, but it's moving. Like I said earlier on about moving people around or imagine space. If from here you can't hit me. Not least because there's a table between us. But if I made the space without the table, you're not going to be able. So it's manoeuvring space and around and making sure that I'm creating the space to enact whatever I need to enact without you getting the opportunity to do the same, which is what I was alluding to earlier on. So a lot of that kind of stuff became very important to me is how to manage space. And you mentioned walking down the street here, you're clearly aware of that environment. You can see these kids from X distance away, and what will be going through your mind is he going to try and drop the shoulder on me? Is there a threat here? I hadn't seen anything as a threat. I was the threat. So all of a sudden now everything was a threat. So I started to paint my environment a little bit in use a traffic light system, an inner commentary. Okay, over this side of the road, there's two people walking a buggy, probably less threat than this guy over here. He's got his hands in his pockets. What's in his pockets? Should I cross the road? All that kind of stuff. So I built up this kind of game, if you like, of self-protection.
Is it a positive game? Does it make you quite anxious the whole time?
It did to start with, and then it became second nature. And I do that stuff all the time now, and it doesn't bother me at all. It's just practiced, just normal. And actually, I feel like it's a positive thing. I know you would think, well, you're always on guard then, aren't you?
No, I was going to go back to like no experiences like yours, but I got in a lot of fights as a kid and got in a lot of trouble a fair few times. So and there was a period of time where I would walk into places like bars and nightclubs because invariably for me it would always end in a scrap, where I would be doing that. I'd be scanning the room. I'd be trying to work out, even later on, once everyone's had 5-10 drinks, who are the faces now that I think I need to remember for later, and just have my wits about me.
Yeah, that's exact same as what I was doing. But then what I've done with what I'm saying, where this change happened, is I'm flipping that to say, okay, so what are all the threats, and how do I remove those threats without any violent confrontation? 99.99% of the time, the answer is remove yourself. You know, which the ego wouldn't let me do before that. He's like, I'm not walking away from anything. You're not walking away. You're just dissolving this kind of. This is where it gets a bit hippie. This sort of manifestation of this violence that you've created by being there in the first place.
Do you? I mean, we're jumping forward, so I don't want to go too far into it. But do you now use that same level of scanning your environments and stuff when you're on these physical pursuits in the mountains and things? Is it about scanning dangers and threats the whole time?
Yeah, it's just being aware. And you can kind of, you can't be hyper aware all the time. It's exhausting, but you do it. You do it yourself when you're running, as you're training for your ultras and things now. As you run, you don't sit and think, my right foot's going here, my left foot's going here, there's a car over there. But you are aware of your environment, or you're going to fall on your face, aren't you? So it's, you do that. And it feeds into other things like, I handle quite a lot of the logistics. We were talking about this earlier on, the logistics side of stuff for the big challenges that both Fergus and I kind of attend to. I'll handle all the safety stuff and then reverse engineer that back. And sort of having that environmental awareness and that experience of kind of thinking about the minutiae makes that come out a hell of a lot better.
Right, let's jump. So Nottingham, you sort of tie up the end of that sort of period of your life, and you move transitioning from. Oh, we also have kind of skipped over your kids and family, right? Because you've got, how many kids have you got?
4.
When did they come along? Because that was a big inflection point for you, right?
Yeah, it was, mate. Yeah. So that, the 26, 27, give or take, when I had this kind of moment of realization of who I was then hammered home when Ashley, my wife, became pregnant with Poppy, who's our first. And as soon as she said I'm pregnant, there was a kind of a deep need to move away from all this, which we did within months. Well, Poppy was born, and within 2 months of her being born in Nottingham, we moved, and that was it.
Because you need to get away from that life.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring her up in amongst that. And Ashley had enough. She'd been down there 8-9 months in Nottingham and was fed up with it. It was a hard life for her as well, because everywhere we went, we were, I'd have to make sure we sat in a certain place, and people would buy me drinks, which I wasn't drinking because I didn't know what was in it, and it was just a paranoid life for her all of a sudden. So I think she was quite relieved. Let's get away from this. But that was a huge change for me, because then I had to rethink my life altogether. It's like, okay, so I'm no longer. I had a corporate role. I think I've said this a few times. I was a director of a group of businesses, a business development director. So I was corporately doing very well, and then had this other life where we were doing all this other mad stuff. So I was able to use that kind of corporate role as a mechanism to move. Can you set me up in an office in Scotland? They were happy to do that, but I hated that job as well. So there was still this feeling that I needed to change everything, and Poppy was the impetus for that.
Nice. So you moved back to Scotland.
Yep.
Transitioning out of corporate the world then into coaching. How does that? Yeah,
so I decided, I went to university, went back into education. I think I was 32, 33. So it was a big move.
So that's why I find you so interesting. To just I mean, all these little twists and turns and pivots in your life, from, being a fucking debt collector, hard man, bare knuckle fighter, to wanting to go to university at 32. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I was in this corporate role, and so I hated that job. It was really it was recruitment and foster care recruitment in actual fact, and I found it very.
Oh, I remember you talking about this. I mean, that's deep, right?
I found it very difficult to deal with because my job was to work at the other side of the procurement. So the procurement teams at the essentially at the council, all the councils around the UK, would have these really difficult foster cases that their workers couldn't handle, and our job was to supply the workers, supply the families essentially, because it's a job. And then my job was to find a premium for that, to operate and find the best commercial margin for us. So I was it was awful, in the sense that it was the most capitalist thing with the worst, commoditizing people's sadness and suffering. And I found that very, very difficult, to the point at which it was affecting me mentally. I was really at odds with it. And so I kind of had a bit of a breakdown on it. I was drinking a lot and I was crying a lot. I was really upset about this job that I had to do. But at the same time, I was aware that I needed to keep my family afloat, and I'd given up all this extracurricular stuff, which paid a reasonable amount of money. And God bless both of them. I had this kind of a typical kind of macho thing. I hadn't told anybody. I didn't want to say to anybody, I don't want to do this anymore, because I realized I felt that if I pulled away these kind of pillars of safety, that everybody was going to be disappointed, and I wouldn't be able to feed them and all that kind of stuff. And I eventually spoke to my mum about it, and she was incredibly cross at me for not having said, I shall chase what I need to, that happiness has to come first. So we don't give a fuck what kind of money you're earning, you bloody idiot. What we want is for you to be motivated, happy, and fulfilled, and that's what your wife wants, surely, as well. So she was particularly cross with me, and luckily it was a Skype call at the time. I think if she'd been in front of me, she might well have attacked me. So that was a kick in the arse. And then I went to Ashley straight after that phone call and said, I've just been speaking to my mammy and she's given me a ticking off, and here's what she said. And she went, well, yeah, fucking obviously, so it's, all this fear was taken away in the moment. So the question was, what do you want to do? If we can start fresh and just start from nothing, what would you do? And I said, well, I want to be a strength and conditioning coach for real. I was coaching people a lot, but I want to make it my career. And I felt like to do that I wanted to have the academic underpinning. I wanted to, in retrospect, it might have been a waste of my time. I spent about 4 or 5 years in that kind of academic setting, and don't think I learned a great deal that I didn't already know, frankly, but I got some letters. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of settle into the subject matter and really kind of believe that this is somewhere I could be. So it wasn't a waste of time. But yeah, I was 32. All these kids were 17, 18. Which is kind of good for me because they were all wasting it. They were all out in the piss and I was still studying, so I came away with a few more opportunities. And at the same time kind of building the business and trying to build like a legitimate business, as opposed to just, Ollie or Sam or Scott saying, can you help me with such and such? Yeah, give me 50 quid and I'll do it. This is now, okay, let's build a life out of this. So I guess that at 32, that gives me 16 years, including the start of the university stuff, as sort of a legitimate strength and conditioning coach. And
with a keen interest back then in combat sports, right?
Yeah. Well, that's where I kind of plied my trade most. If I was, which I was now saying to people, listen, I am a coach here. I would like, I can offer a service and all this, and looking at it as a business, those were the people I spoke directly to, because that was the language I understood.
What was S&C like back then for combat athletes?
Very, very. So boxing, it's very still difficult in boxing to get people to fully kind of buy into.
It is, isn't it? You look at it and it's a bit like, it's not like football in a sport, but in football, the sort of managers of the team seem to have power over the S&C coaches in clubs as to what they want the players to be doing, and therefore the S&C is kind of a bit diluted and not very helpful. Yeah. In boxing, it's similar. That sort of the skills coach is like, I'm just going a 5-mile run. That's how you're going to get prepared for a fight. So, were you at loggerheads sometimes with the skills coaches, or did they have some respect for you because you've been through it as a or you've got some boxing nous?
It depended on the coach, really, but for the most part, it was at loggerheads. For the most part, I had to kind of peel the athlete away a little bit and get in their heads in a positive sense and explain to them that the coach would probably push back on this. And so what we want to do is to make sure that we're doing enough to make the positive changes you want, but not enough so that they feel that there's any interruption. So there was a lot of time spent kind of almost negotiating with these guys and saying, because the fear was, and still is to a certain degree, you're going to make people slow or stiff. Which
is crazy, isn't it?
It is crazy. But you can kind of see where they get the interpretation from, because they look at muscle-bound people. Like they think you're going to turn them somehow into a bodybuilder who also boxes, and describing to them that, and then telling somebody they're wrong isn't something somebody ever wants to hear. So actually, no, Mr. Coach of 30 years who has produced 8 champions, you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't help much, does it? So that was kind of a little bit of a minefield. And it hasn't changed much. Boxing's still like that. I mean, I said earlier on, I've worked with Tyson Fury, worked with Billy Joe Saunders, and even in those camps, it was hard to get the message across. It was hard to get them to understand that we could add, that everything we could do if they did it right was additive. It didn't take away.
Did back then with the boxers, is it commercially as a coach, was it lucrative?
No, you couldn't. Certainly not. But boxers don't earn much money unless they're right at the top of the game. So no, it was hard to make much money. So I'd earn a pittance doing it. So for the most part, what I was doing was working with people who, like I said earlier, the language I understood was to go to those people first. Yeah. But then I gradually picked up other clients, and we're going back 16 years now, so it's taken time to build up the experience that I've got. But you pick up another client who, I had the UKSCA qualifications at the time as well, and had a keen interest. I really like weightlifting, so I developed a lot of skill in weightlifting and in coaching weightlifting. So I took on some weightlifters for free and worked with those guys. One girl took her to the Olympics, and so. Where we've and had a good eye for a good athlete as well. So I suppose it's good business, isn't it? It's knowing where things are going to sell. It's like, she's going to do well, so I'll do that one for free, and then it'll get me somewhere. So, so I started to work with different kinds of athletes. But actually, and we'll probably get to this about the hybrid stuff. The basic model of what I was doing didn't really change specifically for each athlete. We're still trying to provide, still looking for where the gaps in their overall capability are. So if you came to me, you're super strong, you're quite powerful, but your aerobic base is shit. We don't need to work on your strength and power, unless they're all shit, But ultimately, we're trying to find out where those gaps in making an absolute athlete is. And boxing, MMA especially, in actual fact, was a great way to kind of look at people from an athletic sense as needing all these different qualities. Alex and I used to talk about MMA guys being obligate hybrid athletes, because they have to have these skill components across the spectrum, have to be able to develop them all moving forward at the same time. You couldn't shut down their aerobic development because you wanted to get them stronger, because that's, they need to develop that at the same time. So any athlete that I then worked with afterwards, I could quickly apply the same philosophy and methodology to and get the same results. So it didn't, barring the technical skills required, so weightlifting kind of sits slightly outside that example because they need to be skillful. But if you look at triathlon, for example, we could apply efficiency, skill and technique things to, and there's a load of technique goes into that, as you know. But once you kind of get past that technical side, the methodological approach and how to get people fitter, again, quote unquote fitter, follows a very similar pattern, and you're just kind of playing. The analogy I always use is like a mixing desk. You've got all this mixing desk, all these kind of different gadgets and numbers and things, but if you just slam the treble up, then the bass is going to sound shite. So that's what was happening with training a lot. We're seeing people just getting stronger. You do that, but now you're masking this, so we need to push it all, and you need to be clever how you do it. But if you push them all up, the music sounds better.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there about just the actual essence of strength conditioning, which is concurrent training in itself, right?
Yeah.
And probably why a lot of the people that have been exposed to rugby S&C excel probably a little bit quicker into the realm of hybrid training, because they've developed aerobic system alongside some strength, at the same time. Yeah. So we've referenced Alex a couple of times. Let's fast forward to your involvement with Alex, and just for the listeners, just let them know kind of who Alex Viada is. I think the people in the hybrid space will know of him.
Surprisingly, fewer and fewer. That's Alex's fault, because he doesn't talk about himself enough. I'm sure he'd agree, or maybe he'd disagree because he doesn't want to talk about himself. So Alex Viada is ultimately the word hybrid in this industry setting was entirely his. He created that. He wrote a book called The Hybrid Athlete, which was a description of his background, his understanding of the gaps, similar to how I've just described, and the methodological approach to how to I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what his definition was, but it's a definition we still use, which is that the concurrent training of two or more disciplines that are disparate to each other, or fucking some shit like that, I don't know. Point being is that if you look at a strength athlete, or the whole cardio kills you gains nonsense, if you look at this kind of stuff and you say, okay, so what we want is a methodology that allows you to work, because usually things are periodized in the sense that, okay, for this block we're going to work on your strength and nothing else moves, and then we'll let that hang for a bit, put that into maintenance, and maybe work on your aerobic pattern. But if you just let that die off, it just drops back down. So nothing's moving forward, just only things are moving forward in their own brief moment. So his methodology was, or his idea was, that you could move these things forward at the same time with an intelligent approach. So he coined the phrase the hybrid athlete, wrote a book called The Hybrid Athlete, laid out his thoughts and a very scientific approach to it. And at the time I was working with him.
How did you connect with him first?
I came to him about 3 years, maybe 2 years previous to the book coming out, for coaching, because I was at a point, I don't know if you've met this point yourself a few times and kind of flip-flop with it yourself, where I was fucking around with my own programming too much. So I would look at it and it's like a fly on the television. I'm only seeing one pixel and I think I understand it because I'm so immersed in my own sort of myopic viewpoint of who I am, and I wasn't ever able to, for a while I wasn't able to kind of fly out and see the full picture. So I was messing around with it too much. I thought, I have to offset this. I have to have somebody that I'm accountable to. I was doing some very big things at the time, and even managing my own training was then sort of exhausting. So Alex was the only choice that I could see, because he was the only person who was speaking the same language. So he coached me for a couple of things.
How did you hunt? Because he does fly under the radar. He doesn't have a big following. Not many people do know him.
No.
How do you find someone like that?
He was quite active on Facebook at the time, and there was forums as a coach that I belonged to that he would pop up on, where a question was asked and somebody would give the answer, and he would quietly underneath in the comment section say, actually, you're talking shite. But in a very clever and not a condescending manner at all. He would just sort of deliver the scientific kind of counterpunch to whatever kind of this week's statement was. It was like, actually, if you look at this, this and this, you'll find that this is actually the answer. And I found his candor and his intelligence, possibly the most intelligent man I've ever met in my life, Alex.
Really?
Yeah, bizarrely intelligent. Like a savant or something. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But he would have such smart answers and such intelligent answers. And I guess there's a kind of a little bit of ego at play there, because they were the answers a bias rather, because I would read that and go, yeah, exactly. And I saw myself liking and loving and all the rest of it. Yeah, exactly. With Alex enough times, I think, well, he's probably the only person I can fully get on board with coaching me. Do you remember Lyle McDonald?
Yeah, of course.
So Lyle, almost tellingly, was complimentary about Alex a few times. I thought, well, here you go. Because he was never complimentary about anybody. So Alex passed the Lyle McDonald litmus test. So I reached out. He was super excited about my goals and the way that I was looking at things as well, which is almost identical to his. And then, 2016, I think I jumped in to be a coach. His company's Complete Human Performance, so I became one of his coaches. So anything that sat within my niche, he would kind of hand out to me to manage, and we worked together for. Well, I still actually coach. I still have a place on Alex's roster as a coach. To this date. What
were your athletic goals personally alongside being a coach at that stage?
I wanted to do, so I love the mountains, as you know, and I was kind of keen to do, I decided or realised I wasn't, I'm not going to compete fighting anymore. I still love jiu-jitsu and things, but these younger, faster guys were starting to beat me at every move. So, I wanted to get out in the mountains and kind of, I wanted to be able to maintain my strength, to continue to get stronger when it suited me. I'm not always pursuing a PB, but I don't want to slip back too much. And so be able to match that up with also running ultra endurance events, big ultra endurance events. And the goals still remain the same, which would be, I've just, as you know, just done 250 miles last year through the Arctic Circle. And then we've got the same distance through the jungle I'd like to do. I want to go up and down the 8,000 meter peaks. And so there's a few big sort of lofty goals in there. But I wanted to do them whilst maintaining that kind of strength output and that power output, and not having to say, well, I'll shelf the strength stuff in order to pursue this, which I fully believe I don't have to.
And do you think then technically to be a hybrid athlete, or to feel as though you're truly doing hybrid training, you just need to be able to concurrently push numbers on both ends of the spectrum? Or is there certain numbers related to your weight, for example, strength to weight ratio, that would qualify you to be there? Or is it just purely subjective and it can be whatever it needs to be?
When it really breaks down to me, it's subjective. I think the key element is that if we consider those two very disparate ends of the spectrum, we consider pure strength or pure power, but let's call it pure strength. And then at the other end, pure aerobic capacity.
And are we using squat, bench, dead when we're talking about pure strength?
As a proxy, anyway. Yeah. That's probably the best way. It's an easy metric, isn't it, to manage? So if we look at SBD at one end and look at pure aerobic capacity, your ability to keep moving aerobically for a long time.
What are we defining as a long time?
Well, it depends how long you can go now. We just want to get it better, I suppose. So for me, I'm talking about days and days and days, but for somebody it might be their first 5K. And the example actually back then was we were looking at powerlifters. Alex's go-to example was often powerlifters at the pointy end of that sort, real competitive high-end, top-end powerlifters that are pulling 800-900 pounds off the floor, but couldn't run for the bus, and didn't want to in case it was going to kill their total, which from a competitive perspective makes a lot of sense. I don't want anything to interfere with my ability to achieve what I want to achieve. If you're going to tell me to jump on an air bike or go for a run, I know, having tried that 3-4 times, it hurts and I've got to take a week off training. So ram that up your hoop. That's what we were getting every time. But the barring a little bit of a kind of an entry pain, okay, let's say you're going to go through 4 to 6 weeks of kind of just adjusting to this new fatigue, but we can guarantee and promise that if you follow the methodology, you follow the logic and follow the science, you can maintain that 800-900 pound pull, plus we can get you aerobically fitter. And what if we were to tell you, and this was the point of it all, that being aerobically fitter is going to increase your total? Or what if we were to tell you that increasing your total is going to, at the other end, if you're an endurance runner, you're an excellent ultra runner, you're doing 100, 200 mile runs competitively, the last thing anybody wants to hear is you should lift weights. It's the same as the boxing thing. Well, no, I don't want to slow down. But strength work in of itself, that absolute strength work, is going to create efficiency, proprioceptive balance gains, if you like, that are then going to speak to your ability to move faster and for longer. And you're kind of doing it at the moment. You're proof of that. But the methodology that I've developed over the years speaks to those extremes, and then anybody can come at any point in the middle. So we don't need numbers. It's not like you are a hybrid athlete if you have achieved X, 200 kilos or below, and you're not quite hybrid on a deadlift kind of thing. It's just, if you come to me with an 80 kilo deadlift and you just want to get it to 90, but also want to continue to work towards your first 10K race, that's hybrid, because you're looking at these two disparate ends of the spectrum. And I guess the flip of that is the idea that just doing everything all at once makes a person hybrid, and I should cover this off with, I have no issue whatsoever with Hyrox, but the idea that I guess a lot of Hyrox athletes, where you're talking about the bastardization of the phrase, are talking about being hybrid, but it's not really hybrid in terms of those definitions, because you're actually sitting within, they're generally not looking at peak strength, they're generally not looking at peak, it's kind of a threshold test, being a Hyrox athlete. It's an amazing thing, but then just saying because we're doing more than one thing seems to have become the kind of catch-all for hybrid, which is, well, that's what I wanted slightly irks me.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to touch on. So are we saying, by definition, hybrid training is exclusively using running as the modality that's going to push endurance, or can it
no, anything? So we're looking at the two ends of that kind of physical capability. So, like you asked earlier on, is SBD the metric? Only for conversational purposes, because it helps illustrate. But it doesn't have to be at all. It could be whatever you like. It could be a strongman, and it could be Atlas stones, or it could be whatever you want it to be. So I guess it's an energy systems recognition. We're actually trying to say that you can manage things right up this kind of phosphocreatine end at the same time as creating. We're kind of debunking the interference effect, essentially. Down at the other end, you've got anaerobic pack. So a triathlete who wanted to do strongman would be a great example. I think the key for us was to say that you can still maintain a competitive push. If somebody, that's why the powerlifter running is a good example, because you've got somebody who doesn't want to do aerobic work because they fear that the aerobic work is going to somehow interfere with their strength capability. And what we're saying is it will and it won't. And here's the won't is much more powerful. So here's how to manage it so it doesn't. That's where the methodology kind of kicks in.
Yeah, nice. So we've got some clear definitions. We're training at both ends of the spectrum, peak strength and
and everything in between,
and everything in between. But we are pushing both ends.
Yeah,
because I think we to your reference point about high rocks is that they sit very much in between.
Yeah,
you've got these people that aren't really training for strength and not really training their endurance. They are just threshold for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever it may be. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that we're also accepting that anyone coming into this world of training, their start point is their start point. So long as they are clearly identifying both ends of the spectrum, pushing it within their programming and everything in between, they can consider themselves as doing hybrid training. Yeah, I think where the purest S&C people have got a bit of a bugbear, they're like, well, this is just strength conditioning, which, like we said, it kind of is a fallout of what strength conditioning probably is in an athletic sense.
Well, I mean, the running joke for us at the very beginning of this, and which makes it ironic at all that I've got any, and I don't really have any will to maintain or hold on to this. Wait a minute, hybrid is this, and kind of get my fucking jukes back up or anything.
Give them a stookie.
What's most interesting to me with this kind of stuff is that all of it should be an opportunity to just enjoy training.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the bit is for me from the very beginning. We were saying to guys, again, let's go back to that same powerlifting. I'm sure anybody listening is getting bored of this, but we're saying the example Alex gave was that he had I wish I remember the guy's name because he was famous at the time as a powerlifter, but he was working with this guy who would get tired throwing his kids up in the air, and you've got three of them. You know how much fun it is to play with the kids. He was too tired to do it. He was throwing them up in the air, and 2 or 3 throws, and really, like the Americans say, he was getting winded doing that. And what we did with this guy, or what Alex did with this guy, was give him his aerobic capacity enough so that he was still progressing as a powerlifter, still winning big competitions, but not getting gassed out playing with his kids. Now, if hybrid has given something to anybody, then it's given this guy his life back a little bit. He can be a better dad. And although that's kind of a slightly outside of that kind of absolute training framework, we're still speaking to the outcome should be. And the running joke I mentioned was that when Alex first came up with this idea of hybrid, he'd already written the book. And somebody said, "What are you going to call it?" He said, "Oh, fuck, I don't know. We haven't got a title. Hybrid. Call it hybrid training." So it's just a throwaway title to give it a grab point. And really we just did we used to just call this fitness.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say, it sounds like fitness, right?
Yeah. And I guess the difference is the kind of methodology itself, the way that I'll coach people, and the way I look at those different energy systems or the sort of biomechanical model or how people are moving, etc., allows me, and you guys have got a very similar way of working actually, but it allows me a framework within to move that mixing desk around.
Yeah.
But it's just a methodology. It's just one route to the end, which should be something I've seen recently is my job, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is to kind of facilitate joy. That's all I'm here for, is to give you the opportunity to step into something new you may not have done, or to push forward with something you thought you couldn't. Or, if you say, I'm a power lifter, but I've always wanted to try triathlon, but I suppose that's never for me. You're like, listen, let's have a conversation about that. And that's the beauty of it. So when it becomes bastardized, the frustration for me isn't the definition so much as, well, actually what you're doing, you get guys, and you'll see them yourself, who are trying to own the phrase purely for marketing. And you're like, now you've missed it again. Now it's, how do we put a shiny label on this in order for people to buy it? Because you want to sell it as a commodity. No longer are you facilitating joy. You're not doing this so that Brett can throw the kids in the air. You're doing it for personal gain.
What other ways in which do people get it wrong? So for the listeners that want to get into it or are doing it or they're doing their version of it right now, we know what the key things are to look out for to try and put into the program, or in terms of your intentions going into to your training block. What are the things where people go wrong?
Doing too much too soon, expecting too much of themselves. The way that we always describe, even when we have consultations with people and we get this kind of, oh God, yeah, nod, is that somebody might have come from a background in one or the other side of this spectrum and then tried to splice two programs together. So, I don't know, let's say an endurance cyclist who's thought, I really have always fancied getting stronger, I'm just going to do a Wendler 531. Well, that program's written as a full program for somebody, isn't it? It accounts for the volume of training they're doing that week. I think Wendler at one point started to add sled work for the sake of and extra bits. But it wasn't much. It was just to stop people getting a little bit bored of just the 531. Because the program itself, if you do that, is a lot of bloody work and hard to recover from. So the problem that we see people all the time doing is they think, well, if I just add running into my lifting program, my current lifting program, I'll just pull this marathon program off the internet, maybe chop one, do the running in the morning and the lifting in the evening or vice versa. But they're putting 200% of a program together and getting no results, and they're getting injured and they're getting frustrated. And then this is where this kind of notion of an interference effect comes into play a lot more colloquially and anecdotally than scientifically, is because, well, running killed my gains. No, it didn't. Doing 200% of your programming capacity killed your gains. It's the same as the boxing. Well, lifting's going to make me slow. Only if you lift wrong and lift too much and don't apply it in the right way. So that's where I see the biggest problems, is people approach it, look at maybe guys like you or guys like Fergus or whatever and say, well, he's able to do all these things. This is super cool. I'm going to do those things too. And they jump in gung-ho with all the best of intentions and then fall hard because they're trying to do too much at once. So I think it's just sort of, we bang on a lot about a minimum effective dose. You want to do as little as possible for as much adaptive progress as possible.
It's a really hard concept for people in the fitness space, particularly getting into it to really understand. Because a lot of people that are using these sort of methods of fitness for, yes, to get stronger, yes, to get fitter, but also for changes in their body composition or the way they look and various other reasons for it. But I think the beauty of hybrid training or just trying to be strong, or this constant pursuit of being stronger and fitter alongside each other is a lifelong pursuit. That's something that's quite exciting, because it means that you're forever trying to be stronger as you age, but you're forever trying to go that little bit further. But you're right, if you come into it and try and mash two things together, and look to that inspirational person that you're seeing on social media, it is a very fast way to burn yourself out, injure yourself, and literally it's a fast track to nowhere.
Well, and then it speaks negatively to the system as well, or to the industry as well, because what will happen, and I guarantee you've had this more than me because you look better, but is that you'll get, well, Ollie says you can do these things, right? They haven't bothered to fucking come to you and get a program. They've just decided, well, I can do it too. So they jump in and mash this program together, as you see. Same happens with Fergus, me to a lesser degree, but they mash these programs together, fall hard, and then say, they must be on drugs then.
Yeah.
No, he's just fucking dedicated 20 years or so to intelligently and incrementally building this training program. And what's the key is the methodology is an important factor, but consistency is key, and getting it right and then consistently building from that. So yeah, it becomes a double-edged sword, isn't it? Is that they get it wrong and then blame the wrong things for getting it wrong, and then the whole thing becomes this kind of negative churn. And our job should be to kind of reach out and say, listen, I've described the role that we've got as being a Sherpa more than anything, is that you're saying, listen, I've been up this hill, I know how to take you up this hill, but you kind of got to come with me. But at a certain point, you're going to have to maneuver around yourself. And there's maybe 2 or 3 ways to go up here. And then I'm going to decide which one's easiest or best based on how you are moving at that time. But that's why you have people in experienced roles allowing you the opportunity to come with them, which is why our job's pretty important, I would say. Yeah,
and that brings us on to the sort of next piece, and your job as a coach, right? And what you've built with Omnia, what we've built with Marchon, and I think this is how we kind of first had this mutual respect and coming together with, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's something paratus. How do you say it? Prepared in all things. Omniparatus, right?
It's very similar to in omniparatus.
In omniparatus,
just prepared in all things.
Yeah. So that being Omnia's strapline for people that don't know, prepared in all things, and it speaks to exactly what it is, right? And same without limits, being ready for anything. What what does that mean to you personally, being prepared in all things, and how does it resonate with with new people coming into your world in Omnia?
Well, from a purely physical perspective, I like the ability that I have to be able to go into the gym, lift some weights, move the weights around, know what I'm doing. I know I'm relatively strong, and I quite like that. So it's the you asked earlier on about what are the metric numbers and all the rest. It doesn't really matter as long as you feel like you're as strong as you can be and it's useful and so I'm happy to be that way. I'm physically robust. I think it's bloody good for my health, all that kind of stuff. And it speaks to the sports that I do, jiu-jitsu and things. But what I want to be able to do is to be able to go into the gym, lift heavy, enjoy that environment. And if you said to me, "Hey Johnny, see in 3 weeks' time, do you fancy doing 150 miles through the mountains with me?" I can say, "Yeah, that'd be brilliant," because I've developed the capacity to be able to do all these things. So none of those things are shut off to me anymore. Excuse me. So, barring modality expertise, like I'm all right on a bike, but I'm shit in the water. So
I can relate.
I can probably say to most things, yes, please. It doesn't mean I'm going to go out and win them, but it means I have the opportunity to do these things, enjoy them, and explore loads and loads of different environments from a physical perspective. And going back to the very start of this conversation, that then certainly gives me more scope to explore who I am as an individual and to find where my limits are and to find where those kind of fears are. Like you'll have an apprehension building up. You can't lie and tell me you don't about your
no, it's definitely there.
Yeah, and it'll get worse and worse or heavier and heavier as it gets closer. For the transatlantic ultra that you guys
Transalpine.
What have I said?
I'm going to run through the sea.
I've done that about 3-4 times. Yeah. The Transalpine ultra that you guys are doing. But from that, you're not just going to get the opportunity to say, I have run this distance. You're going to get the opportunity within those moments to find out where your limits are, where your limits in your head are. Physically, it becomes much, much less of an issue. And the same happens with lifting. People, you can push your lifting real hard, but if you push it really to the fullest capacity you've got, you find that grind and you find that kind of fight or flight that you get in those moments. And there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot of, it can then speak to kind of things that you're doing externally, that are more real life things, if you like. So you get the opportunity with all those things just to find out more and more about yourself and explore, like I said at the beginning, that kind of spiritual weightlifting that comes alongside it, which is super important to me for people that I'm working with, is that they're coming out of it. We're doing a thing at the moment we've called the wintering.
I've seen it. It's great.
It's really enjoyable from our side of things as well, because what we're doing is we've got a program of training where we're developing all these components that we just discussed. And at the end of it, everybody on that program is going to do a 12-hour effort to their capacity. So they could go 12 miles if they've never been 12 miles before, but they have to be out for 12 hours working to a relative intensity and what's going to be hard for them.
Independently. So you all start at the same time, but it's...
Yeah. We want them out on their own as well. For them, when we're talking to them in a great deal about safety and things, but certainly want this to be an experience where they get into their own heads a little bit, which would be scary for people. By the time they pop out the other side, they won't, I guarantee 99.9% of those people won't say, oh, well, I got X distance. They'll then reflect on it about what happened to them during that, where their head went, whether they wanted to give up, how many times they wanted to give up, what got them through it, all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of it, they'll have empowered themselves spiritually, I suppose, or certainly mentally, and they'll have developed a certain amount of resilience that they can apply back into their kind of day-to-day life. That's an outcome of fitness, to your question, that is super, super important, I think, because with this hybrid methodology or with this open scope, if you want to take that kind of label off the table, you then have the opportunity to explore these things in very, very many different environments rather than just always going back to that one well. Now you've got plenty of wells to go to.
There is just nothing else. There is nothing else like that, right, than pursuing a program, a body of work in the pursuit of fitness with a test like that that's going to give you honest answers about where you're at.
That's it, yeah.
Physically, not so much, because if you've done the work physically, you're probably prepared.
You should know you could do it.
Yeah. Mentally, it's where the questions start to get asked. Yeah. And it's only through going through that process that you begin to know whether you actually have the answers.
Yeah, and if you again use your upcoming ultra, you're going to get, you told me earlier, 6 days, is it?
Yeah.
That's a lot of days. That's a lot of days, Ollie.
I'll be on the phone to Uncle Johnny.
And you are going to get day 2, you maybe wake up super excited. Day 3, you're going, oh my God, I've got to go again. My legs are hurting. This is insane. And then by day 4, there are questions that you will ask of yourself. And this could come day 1, day 2. That in the answering of them, and even if you don't answer that bell, then you've learned a lot about yourself. And that's a really interesting thing as well. If you fail, quote unquote fail, then there's something magical about that as well, because then you get the opportunity to say, okay, what brought me to the point where I couldn't continue? What is it? What were the environmental aspects? What were the mental aspects? What were the conversational things going on? What was the all this kind of stuff builds, and then you get to learn something about you that you perhaps couldn't have learned about yourself unless you'd forged yourself in that particular fire.
And if you do fail, what do you think it's from? Do you think it's just exposure to those experiences?
It could be anything, and you could fail.
Because how do you prepare for those questions?
You can't. That's the beauty.
When you're like at homeostasis, you're kind of like, even the biggest, darkest questions that comes to me, I can fucking do it.
Yeah. Which is great because you believe that, because then that means that you'll still go out and try. Otherwise, you go, oh, I probably can't answer that question. I shall never go out there. So,
but is there something different between those that can push through versus those that?
No, not often. I think there's an old fighting adage that you can't teach heart. I think you can teach heart. I think you just have to put people in that kind of crucible. You have to take people to where their limits are, and have them suffer a little bit, and then knowing just how much suffering to apply to an individual comes down to good coaching and a really good understanding of the athlete, and or in your case, a good understanding of yourself as an athlete. But I think there's I wouldn't encourage anybody to go out and deliberately fail, but I think failing is really, really important, because, and it's trite to say, there's loads of phrases you can throw out, loads of stoic kind of throwouts as well that you can, the obstacle is the way, and failure is an opportunity and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is those things are little sayings for a reason. If you get to that point and fail, it might be incidental. It might be something that happened that day. It might be a thought that you got in your head, like an earworm bit of music that wouldn't go away and you just couldn't cope with it anymore. It's going to be different every time. But so there's probably no way to answer what would make you fail. But barring if you hadn't done training, if you get to the point where you're just purely exhausted and you fail because you physically couldn't continue anymore, then your training was shite. So you've got another opportunity to go back and say, okay, what do I need to do differently? But if it's the mental question that you were asked and couldn't answer, or a mental question that you were asked, you're asking yourself these questions that you then said, well, I've got to stop. Then I'm not even sure I'd frame that as failure. I'd frame that as a moment where you learn a shit ton more about yourself, which is where, to your question at the beginning, these kind of things for me are framed around fear, because you're already scared of this task that you've set yourself. You not just so you're already facing fear. You don't know what's out there. You've looked at the mapping. I'm sure you've understood the route. You're probably using kind of gradient equivalents here to learn how to move in certain environments. I'm sure you doubtless yourself, Jens and Miles, are going to go out and kind of visit areas that kind of mimic that kind of stuff. So all of this is environmental. But so the environmental stuff, by the time you get there, is going to be something that you'll have achieved already. You've said this already yourself a moment ago, but you've not pushed to the end of that limit yet, and you can't until you take on the actual end task. So how do you train that mental stuff? You can't until you push to that end task.
I guess that's the beauty of it, right?
That's exactly
put yourself in the fire.
Yeah, you've got to. So. Another quote I've always liked is that it was the north wind that made the Vikings. You've got to push into it. You've got to be. There's got to be something pushing back against you in order for you to feel like what pushing is. And I guess you can then get addicted to those things. It's like, well, I've done my first 50 miler. What am I going to do now? I don't know. Fucking run across the Arctic Circle or something. Whatever it might be. So those limits become limits. You're pushing and pushing and pushing, and the concept of without limits is great. The concept of prepared in all things is great, because you're trying to give yourself the opportunity to then say, well, I can do whatever I like, and all you're left with is what's in your head, and there's something wonderful about that.
Yeah, I think that's really why me and the boys are doing it. I mean, the views is something that we're looking forward to, but I think really just exploring what we're sort of made of.
Yeah.
And I think you have got to be of a certain mindset to want to go out and put the training into do this sort of thing. But I think if you constantly are pushing with this lens of without limits or being prepared in all things, then you've got to go out and buy a ticket to the dance. Is there ever been a time where you've failed?
I've never failed at anything, Ollie. I resent the question.
I thought so.
Yeah, loads of times, mate. Yeah, I've put myself in situations that I shouldn't have done. I've started races and things when I've been injured, and retrospectively that was just pure ego. I didn't want to not start. So I failed because of stupid things. That was just bad decision making. I've failed. Do you know?
You haven't failed, have you?
It's a joke. I haven't failed. I've had some real hard times. So I've done a couple of races. I think we've laughed about these before. I did a race called the Arc of Attrition down in Cornwall. I don't really look at them as races either. It's just a sort of an opportunity to move. And I'm not going to win the bloody thing, and I've no real intention of trying. It's just a personal challenge to see if I can get through this kind of harrowing horror. And the Arc of Attrition itself is a coastal race in Cornwall where you move around the coast of Cornwall for 100 miles, and it's the gradients, it builds and builds because you're going up and down cliffs all the time. And I broke my leg at mile 4. We heard it snap, me and the guy behind me. He heard it snap so badly that he puked instead of me. Oh my God, I think you broke your leg. What? And then I continued, so I could feel that it was gone. But I could feel if I ran with it or moved with a flat foot and wasn't flexing, it's the bottom of my tib that had snapped, wasn't flexing, I could probably continue. So there was a kind of a, do I stop? Do I not stop? And so I eventually get pulled out of that. 100 miles, I get pulled out at mile 96.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
Did you give him a sticky as well?
I failed that, but I was raging. If I hadn't broke my leg, I'd have done really quite well. The same happened on the spine race I started and ended up with hypothermia because I had compartment syndrome. I kept going and it was too cold and wet. They had to take me out of that race. So there's been, those are failures. Those are failures. You get your DNF, did not finish. That's gutting. But I started, and I learned things about myself. I learned things about my physical capacity, my tolerance for pain. We've already covered that. Stubbornly, it's not easy for me to give up. But actually, I don't think I've set out to do something that's kind of vastly challenging that I haven't managed to do. But, and that sounds like a shite answer, I've not failed at anything, but within the tasks, within the moments in these races, there are moments where you fail and succeed. So trying to frame that for you is like, well, you'll do this on long runs yourself now. So the last big thing I did was the Arctic last year, with, again, 250 miles through the Arctic Circle, 5 days, but you're moving 16 hours a day because you're moving slowly. And I have to carry, it's all self-supported. So I'm carrying, at the start of the race, it's your food for the whole thing. So there was a good 20 kilo pack on me. And I gave up 100 times, maybe more. You stop and say, fuck this. I'm not going any further. I'm done. And then that in itself is a little momentary failure, I think. And then you talk to yourself, you look around and go, well, what are you going to do though? Are you going to go back? Are you going to continue? Are you going to go into the next checkpoint and tell these Sami people who've come all the way here, I don't want to do it anymore? And they say, why not? You say, I can't be bothered. I'm just fed up with it. No. Pull yourself together, get moving, go again. So there's little failures happen all the time. It's just what you do with that failure. So I guess barring races where I've been stopped because of injury or stopped because I'm doing stupid things or like wandering around in circles because I had hypothermia, I've not actually failed at, no.
That comes from
too good.
It comes from preparation, right? That comes from
it does,
doing the work.
Yeah, it really does. I've always been fit enough to do the things. This is probably the most egotistical statement that you'll get on this podcast, but I mean this from a really important place. Is I don't think there's anything that you can do that I can't do. But flip that back around. I don't believe there's anything I can do that you can't do. And anybody around this table, Scott and Sam are here looking in, bored probably. There's nothing that we're doing that they can't do. It's going to be opportunity to do it. You and I, for instance, have carved out a certain professional life which actually affords us not just the opportunity to do these things, but there's a need to do them as well. You need to kind of say I am doing. You kind of lead by example.
Yeah.
So part of your training, I'm sure you and Lauren talk about it at home, it's actually your job training. You know,
actually, we've talked about a lot of the last sort of 6 months because my job has changed a lot now, particularly in relation to last year. But yeah, completely.
Yeah, so that's your job to do that. You know, so we have different opportunities than others, but there's that because we've that opportunity. We're then getting the opportunity to do things like the Transalpine or the Arctic or whatever we've both got coming up over the next couple of years. But it doesn't mean, like Scott, as an example, will say, I could never do that. But yeah, he fucking could. Yeah, he could. Quite possibly better than me. You know, we don't know. He's not tried it yet. But everybody has that kind of, man, that's crazy what you're doing, you know. And I've always had the belief that it's not, you know. And it does sound really kind of big-headed. It really isn't supposed to be. It's just I'm believing in everybody when I believe in that, not just believing in myself. I think that barring obvious impediment, you know, if you've got one leg, you're going to struggle more than I am to do X things, but then there's still a way around those things. So I'm firmly of the opinion that what one man can do, another man can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just on holiday and had a conversation with someone we were talking about the marathon. Like, I could never do that. I said, well, yeah, right now you can't because of where you think you're starting from. But once you've done a marathon training block, you've already done. You've pretty much done the race. Yeah,
which I think is the joy I get. These are the moments where we're talking about the failure. Is there's a certain accountability, not to people looking in and going, well, I paid Jonny for a training program and I can't even finish this thing. I don't really think that way, but I do think if I'm going to say that people can do anything, I need to complete this thing because and I've got 4 kids, you've got 3. There's that little bit where I don't want to come back and explain to any of my 4, I just gave up. You know, because where's the lesson there? I want to come back. If I came back and say, well, I fell down an ice hole, froze, and they had to peel me out, and you know I wasn't allowed to continue because I got frostbite, then cool. Like the Peru thing, you know, I went to Peru last year.
Almost died.
Yeah, I was 3 weeks in hospital in a hyperbaric chamber with pneumonia after I got altitude sickness. Well, not altitude sickness. It was a pulmonary edema. It was a bloody ill. You know?
Talking it down, saying
a bit ill. So I was able to come away from that. People going, are you disappointed? Do you feel like you failed? No, I got really ill. You know, I'm going back this year to go again, which makes it even more scary because I might get ill again. But as long as you keep moving forward, as long as you keep trying to move forward, then, you know, I think that's the key. But we have the opportunity to kind of provide people that example, at least of trying. But that could be just somebody doing their first 5K. Is as impressive, if not more, the first time somebody does something. Yeah. You doing your Transalpine, me doing whatever my next thing is much less impressive than somebody saying, like the man you're talking about on holiday, you know, right, I hear you. I'm going to start training. I'm going to start it with 5 minutes around the block every day, you know. And he does that 5 minutes and comes back, sees you in 6 months, say, I'm preparing for my first marathon. That's some impressive shit, isn't it? Really. And that's where it all comes down to for me, that kind of facilitation of other people kind of discovering themselves.
Yeah. This has been power. So for those people that didn't know who you are, that now have a very good understanding of who you are, and I'm sure they're going to go and follow the Jonny Pain story.
Slightly schizophrenic understanding. What is he all about? He's talking a lot of shit.
What can they expect from you for the rest of the year?
So this year, this is a big year actually. Last year got written off. So in June, I got ill in Peru and the rest of the year was done. We talked in the car on the way through. I've only really started feeling like I'm finding my feet again because I was really very ill. So this year, in April, I'll be doing a race with a friend of mine runs a company called Beyond the Ultimate, and they have races, part of which is this global series of like jungles and Arctic and things that I've been doing. So one of their races is in Knoydart, which is a small island off the north coast of Scotland, northwest. So I'm doing 150 miles through the hills over 3 days there, that's a gnarly race. That's hard. Scotland's brutal. You know, people go all over the world, but Scotland's a tough place to move through. So that's my re-entry, which is could have picked an easier start, but that's what we're doing. So I'm excited about that because I love the hills so much. Then we're going to go. Hopefully, I'm going back to Peru to kind of tackle that again.
Face your demons.
Yeah, it really is something that. I mean, I didn't even get to the start line. I was ill, just entering into the kind of the altitude that we went to. Just bad luck, frankly. So I don't feel like I failed in any sense of that. I just never got there. So I'm going to go back and try that. I think my wife is much more nervous than I am about that, in actual fact. So that'll happen in June. Then we're going to do Mont Blanc not long after that, which speaks to everything I love. And then we're hoping that a good friend of mine, Mac, who runs Nomad Mountaineering, to do a first descent somewhere. So we're trying to we're looking at the map and pick somewhere. I think either Turkey or Greenland at the moment, I think, and climb a mountain that nobody's ever climbed before, and put a flag in. That'll be ours, the first descent up there. And obviously we'll have to make that happen. That'll be a good bit of rope climbing and actual mountaineering. So that's happening. I feel like I've missed something out, but it's a big year.
Fuck.
And we're hopefully pushing Omnia to bigger and better things.
Yeah.
A lot going on there as well, as you know. So it's a big year.
Well, anyone, like I said, that didn't follow you before now, I implore them to go and follow along, because if you are in this space as someone looking to get into hybrid training, I think you guys are at the top of what that means. I know you work with the everyday people as well, but as athletes and as coaches, you've seen all there is to be seen in that space, and you're out there on the front line doing gnarly shit. So
yeah, we enjoy it. Like I say, we're privileged to have that position, but we do, come one, come all. Yeah. There's nobody, like I say, Tyson Fury, this one, that one, doesn't matter. If you're into it and we're able to help you in the journey, we're super excited to do so.
Yeah, brilliant. Jonny Pain, thank you, mate.
Thank you.